Welcome to the Political Economy of the Environment. I'm Jim Boyce, and today's episode is about the economy and the environment. We're going to start out by embedding the economy within the environment. Rather than viewing the economy as a self-contained sphere floating somewhere in outer space, we're going to situate the economy within the planet we inhabit. In most economics textbooks, you find a circular flow model of the economy in which there are two main components. The first is the household, the second is the firm. The firms provide goods and services to the households, and in return, the households provide money to the firms. And the households provide labor and capital, the factors of production, to the firms, and in return, the firms pay them money. And this economy merrily spins around. Embedding the economy in the environment involves recognizing that in addition to labor and capital, the economy relies on raw materials that are provided by nature. And in addition, the processes of consumption and production in the economy generate wastes, and the environment serves as the sink for those wastes. And the reason it's important to bring the source and sink functions of the environment into the picture is that the availability of these things is not infinite. They're not unlimited. If they were, it wouldn't matter that we rely on them. But the fact is that the source and sink functions of the environment are limited by the boundaries of our planet and the biosphere that we're part of. Now, this insight, which was brought into economics starting in the late 70s, early 80s, and began to percolate into the profession, led some to think that what this implied is that there are limits on the growth of the economy. And in certain respects, there have to be such limits because there are limits on the source functions and the sink functions that nature can provide. One way in which that limits to growth idea was originally expressed was with a comparison to pondweed. The story goes like this. There's a pond that is finite in its size, and in that pond some weeds start to grow, and the weeds double in their mass every day. And the question is, if the pond will be filled up on the 30th day, and at that point the capacity of the pond to support the weed will be exhausted and the pondweed will exceed this carrying capacity and die, at what point is the pond halfway full? And the answer, the environmentalist intones rather gravely, is on the 29th day. Up until the 29th day, there seems to be plenty of space, but with that exponential growth, the doubling on day number 29 brings us to the 30th day, and the pond is totally full. And one of the questions I want to think with you about now is, to what extent are people, humans, really like pondweed? And how are we different from pondweed? I think there are two important differences. One is that humans have what sometimes is called agency. That is to say, we have the capacity to reflect on what's happening and to change our behavior, to do things deliberately, right? So we can see what's happening to the environment around us, and we can change our behavior in ways that potentially, maybe, avert the filling up of the pond and the ecological disaster that that metaphor suggests would follow. The second reason that humans are different from pondweed is that we're socially differentiated. There aren't rich and poor pondweed. There aren't black and white pondweed. There aren't male and female pondweed. There's just pondweed. And so there's no issue of relations between different pondweeds affecting what's happening in that process of exponential growth to the point that nature's limits are exceeded. But in human societies, of course, we are socially differentiated. If I benefit by doing something that degrades the environment, and you're harmed by what I'm doing to the environment, then what happens actually in our society is possibly going to be affected by the relationship that I have to you. In other words, human relationships with the environment are filtered through human relationships, our relationships with each other. Let's think a little bit more about each of those points. First, about human agency. When we think about human impacts on the environment or on nature, we often think of things like resource depletion, depletion of forests, fisheries, etc., pollution, climate change, biodiversity loss, soil erosion. All of these are negative impacts of human economic activity on the environment. People benefit by doing these things in the short run, but in the long run, there are environmental costs that come back to haunt us. However, it's also possible for people to have positive impacts on the environment. An example would be ecological restoration. Ecological restoration includes doing things like reforesting deforested landscapes, cleaning up polluted areas, etc. We can do things to repair damages that we have inflicted upon the environment. Now, if that were the only positive thing that people could do vis-a-vis the environment, it would be sort of faint praise. It would be like saying, well, people really mess things up, but occasionally they're smart enough to try to make amends. But it's possible, at least one can think about this possibility, that people can do more than simply clean up their messes. It may be possible that people can change the environment, modify the environment, affect the environment in ways that are actually good, at least from the standpoint of long-term human well-being, and possibly from the standpoint of the well-being of other species as well. An example of that is the domestication of plants and animals, the creation of what sometimes is called cultivated biodiversity. If you think about the food that you and I eat every day, the corn, the potatoes, the rice, the wheat, poultry, eggs, if we're not vegans, etc., etc. All of these species that we rely upon actually exist as a result of human interactions with nature. They wouldn't exist if people didn't exist. So over the millennia during which these crops and animals were domesticated and the rich diversity of those species was created with guiding human hands, we changed nature in ways that turn out to be beneficial for human well-being over the long term. It's what you and I rely upon to survive today on this planet. Similarly, agricultural processes don't necessarily result in depletion of the soils, erosion of the soils, depletion of the soil's fertility. There are agricultural practices that actually build deeper and richer soils that are better able to support human well-being over the long term and other plant and animal communities, including soil microorganisms. An example of soil banking would be in the Amazon, where there are some dark, deep soils in parts of the Amazon that turn out to be anthropogenic soils, soils created by human beings who learned a couple millennia ago how they could burn in anaerobic conditions biomass to create charcoal that they would plow into the ground, and that change in the soil composition would make the soil both more fertile and better able to retain moisture and therefore better able to grow crops. Another example of soil banking would be in the acequia ecosystems of the Rio Grande Arriba in the United States and what's now southern Colorado and northern New Mexico, where deep, dark soils were created by Hispano settlers starting hundreds of years ago. And in a similar fashion, they change the environment in ways that make it more productive and better able to support not only human well-being, but other forms of wildlife and plants as well. So it's possible that there could be positive impacts on the environment as a result of human activity, as well as negative impacts. And the balance between the two is an open question. It's a question that depends, and it depends on human agency. It depends on what people decide to do or not to do. The other way in which we're different from pondweed is that we're socially differentiated, right? The effects of environmental degradation involve both winners and losers. That is to say, people who benefit from degrading the environment, otherwise they wouldn't be doing it, and people who are harmed by that environmental degradation. Otherwise, we wouldn't be worried about it as a problem, at least from the standpoint of human well-being over the long term. So whenever we're looking at a problem of environmental degradation, we can ask the three basic questions: who benefits, who are the winners? Who's harmed, who are the losers? And why is it that the beneficiaries are able to impose these harms on others? And in answering those questions, social differentiation in human societies and differences between those who benefit and those who are harmed by degrading the environment become really important for understanding what's going on. Those differences include class differences between rich and poor, they include racial and ethnic differences, and they include gender differences. And these social differences among people in turn impact on how people are affecting the environment. Thanks very much. I'll see you later.